On a quiet Monday morning in Sydney, in a private hospital room where doctors had spent years fighting to keep him alive, Sam Neill's family gathered around a man the world knew as a dinosaur hunter, a submarine commander, a gentle villain in a gangster drama, but who, in his own words, had spent his final years wrestling with something far more ordinary than fame. He had beaten cancer. He had announced it himself, only months earlier, with a kind of quiet relief that comes after years of infusions and uncertainty. And then, suddenly, he was gone. What the headlines did not immediately explain was who he had been thinking of in those last months, and what he had once said in his own hand, about the woman he considered the love of his life. To understand that answer, we have to go back decades, long before Jurassic Park made him a household name. Sam Neill was born Nigel John Dermot Neill in Northern Ireland in 1947, the son of a British Army officer, and he was still a boy when his family relocated to New Zealand's South Island. It was there, in the quiet farmland of Dunedin, that a man who would one day dodge velociraptors on screen first learned the value of privacy, of understatement, of keeping the loudest parts of life close to the chest. That instinct would define him for the rest of his career. He became one of the most recognizable actors of his generation, moving fluidly between New Zealand art films and Hollywood blockbusters, yet he almost never spoke publicly about the people he loved. That reticence is precisely why the story of his romantic life has remained, for most of the public, a footnote to his filmography rather than the center of it. His first significant relationship was with fellow New Zealand actress Lisa Harrow, whom he met in 1980 on the set of Omen 3, The Final Conflict. The two were never formally married, despite some later reports describing her as his first wife, but their partnership produced a son, Tim Neill, born in 1983. They separated before the decade was out, and Neill rarely discussed the relationship in later interviews, preferring instead to speak about his son with quiet pride whenever journalists asked about family. It was a pattern that would repeat throughout his life. Children mentioned warmly, partners mentioned sparingly, and almost nothing offered about the emotional texture of those years. Everything changed, at least in terms of what the public would eventually learn, when Neill traveled to Australia in 1988 to film Dead Calm, a tense thriller shot largely on open water. On that production he met Noriko Watanabe, a Japanese film industry professional working as a translator and later a makeup artist for the crew. In a 2006 interview with The Guardian, Neill described the beginning of their courtship with characteristic self-deprecating humor, recalling that they were essentially marooned together on an island with plenty of time on their hands, and that he pursued her with what he called dogged persistence after facing what he described as tremendous resistance. The pursuit worked. The couple married in 1989, and in January 1991 welcomed a daughter, Elena. Neill also adopted Noriko's daughter from a previous relationship, Maiko, folding her fully into the family he was building. For nearly 30 years, Noriko Watanabe was the fixed point in Sam Neill's otherwise itinerant life, the woman who anchored him between film sets on opposite sides of the world. Several biographical accounts published in a year since have described her as the person Neill referred to, in private and in scattered interviews, as his rock and in some retellings, as the love of his life. It is worth pausing here, because this is precisely the kind of claim that deserves care rather than certainty. Neill was famously guarded about his personal relationships, and while multiple entertainment outlets have repeated the phrase in profiles of Watanabe, it does not appear that Neill made that exact declaration in a single widely verified public statement. What is documented consistently and across many sources is that he spoke of her with genuine tenderness, that their marriage lasted longer than most Hollywood pairings, and that even after their divorce in 2017, he continued to speak of those decades without bitterness. Whether love of his life was his literal phrase or a description applied to him by others who witnessed the marriage up close, the sentiment behind it tracks with everything he said and did regarding Noriko for the better part of 3 decades. Their separation, when it came, was handled with the same discretion that had characterized the marriage itself. There was no public scandal, no messy court battle playing out in tabloids, simply a quiet acknowledgement that the relationship had run its course. Neill moved on, eventually, to a new chapter that Australians would come to know rather well, given the prominence of the woman involved. In early 2018, it was revealed that Neill was dating Laura Tingle, one of the country's most respected political journalists, at the time serving as chief political correspondent for ABC's flagship current affairs program. The pairing of a beloved international film star and a formidable, serious-minded political reporter struck many as an unlikely match, yet by all accounts the relationship was genuine, low-key, and largely conducted away from cameras, exactly as Neill preferred. For 3 years, the couple built a life together that included quiet trips through New Zealand, evenings at Neill's Central Otago vineyard, and public appearances that were rare enough to generate headlines simply for occurring at all. The relationship ended in 2021, reportedly amicably, without either party offering much explanation to the press. Neill addressed it directly in his 2023 memoir, Did I Ever Tell You This? A book he wrote while undergoing treatment for a rare and aggressive blood cancer diagnosed the same year. In it, he described having 3 wonderful years with Tingle and expressed lasting gratitude for the time they shared, language that speaks to genuine affection without claiming the kind of singular defining status that the phrase love of his life implies. Around the same period, in an interview with the Sydney Morning Herald, Neill described himself candidly as a solitary single man. Admitting the arrangement suited him but acknowledging it was, in his words, a bit lonely. What makes the final chapter of this story so striking is not romantic reconciliation, but something quieter and in some ways, more honest. Though Neill and Tingle's romantic partnership had ended years earlier, the two remained close, and when news of his death broke in mid-July 2026, it was Tingle who offered one of the most personal tributes, sharing a gallery of photographs and videos on social media capturing everyday moments the two had shared, walking, singing, traveling. Her caption, simply reading "Sweet Dreams, Darling Sam," was viewed by millions within hours. In a subsequent radio interview, Tingle spoke with evident emotion about his final weeks, explaining that his body, weakened by years of aggressive treatment for lymphoma, had simply grown exhausted, and that pneumonia had proven to be more than he could withstand, even after conquering the cancer itself. This is the complicated truth beneath a headline that promises a single tidy revelation. Sam Neill did not leave behind one definitive, publicly confirmed statement naming one woman as the love of his life. What he left behind instead was a pattern of devotion, evident across multiple relationships that spanned 5 decades, each handled with the same careful privacy that marked his approach to fame itself. Whether that title belongs most accurately to Noriko Watanabe, the woman who shared nearly 30 years and 2 children with him, or to Laura Tingle, the woman whose tribute closed the final chapter of his public story, is not a question with a single documented answer. Reasonable interpretations point in both directions, and the honest account is that Neill loved deeply more than once, and said so in his own careful way, about more than one woman. What remains beyond dispute is the manner of his death. Sudden, following a hard-won victory over cancer that his family emphasized even in grief, framing his passing as somehow blessed by the fact that he died cancer-free rather than in the grip of the disease that had defined his final years. He was surrounded by family. He was mourned by collaborators including Steven Spielberg, Laura Dern, and Taika Waititi, each describing a man whose gentleness off-screen matched the warmth he so often brought to his characters. And he was remembered publicly and tenderly by the women who had shared his life, each in their own way confirming that whatever love meant to Sam Neill, it was never something he treated lightly, nor something he was willing to reduce to a single name. In the end, perhaps that refusal to simplify love into a headline is the most honest tribute of all, a reminder that a life fully lived rarely fits into one sentence, and that the people we love shape us in overlapping, unrepeatable ways that outlast even the most carefully guarded privacy.